Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of Bonneville International and NAB Joint Board Chairman, Bruce Reese.
Good afternoon. On behalf of NAB, let me welcome all of you to what I know will be a very insightful hour. Let me start the introductions with just one word, and no, it's not plastics. It's Google. It's an amazing story and one that has revolutionized communications. Google is a phenomenon. So where does it go from here, and what does Google mean to the future of those of us in broadcasting? Well, we're about to find out. Over the course of the next hour, we will have the privilege of getting the insights of Google President and CEO Eric Schmidt. And if we miss anything, you'll have a chance to speak to him directly through a Q&A session. Leading the discussion this afternoon will be a man familiar to most of you in the room today, John Seigenthaler. John has been asking questions for more than 25 years. 11 of those years he spent at NBC News. Until recently, John was the anchor of the top-rated weekend editions of NBC Nightly News, as well as the special correspondent for NBC News and the host of the documentary program MSNBC Investigates. He has covered a wide range of stories, including the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the tsunami in Sri Lanka, terrorist bombings in London and Egypt, and the 9/11 terror attacks in New York. Along the way, he has reported for the Today Show, Dateline NBC, and CNBC. During his broadcasting career, he also worked in local TV news in Nashville at WSMV and WKRN, and in Seattle at KOMO. His numerous journalism awards include the Robert F. Kennedy Television News Award, the National Headliner Award, and 2 Emmys. John is a member of the Radio and Television News Directors Foundation Board of Trustees, and we are pleased to welcome him here today. John?
Welcome, everybody. Don't you love that music? Isn't that terrific? It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the warm welcome, Bruce. Thank you for that introduction. Before I came out to this convention here in Las Vegas, I have a son named Jack. He's 9 years old. He's in the 4th grade, and he was at home, at our home in Connecticut, on the internet, and he looked up from the computer the other morning and he said, "Dad," he said, "isn't it great?" He said, "Google is now reporting that you're unemployed." I said, "Well, you knew that, Jack." I said, "You watched me sign off for the last time on NBC Nightly News last week." He said, "Yeah, I know that, Dad, but what's really great about it is once it's on Google, the whole world knows." So before Eric comes out, I want to congratulate him. There's a new generation of 4th graders who know that Google puts the world at their fingertips. We are pleased to have Eric Schmidt with us here today, and I'm especially proud to be before this crowd of NAB and RTNDA friends and spend a little time with you and have this conversation. Like many of you, I'm acutely aware that there are changes going on in broadcasting. And much of our discussion today is going to be about the future of broadcasting, the future of the internet, and the future of news and information. Today we're going to talk to a man who's really at the center of this high-tech revolution. He's been described as a man with the ability to change the world. He's an engineer, a teacher, an innovator, an entrepreneur, an internationally recognized business leader, educated at Princeton University and the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned his PhD in computer science. Before Google, he was the CEO of Novell. Before Novell, he was the Chief Technology Officer of Sun Microsystems, just to go back a few years. He has been called a visionary, the best of his generation, and these days when Eric Schmidt speaks, the business world, the high-tech world, and today the world of television and radio, broadcasting. We all listen. So please give a warm welcome to our guest today, Dr. Eric Schmidt. Wait for the music to go down. This is
the kindest introduction I've ever gotten.
Well, we're pleased to have you here today. This is really great to have you on stage.
We're going to miss you on MSNBC Investigates.
Well, thank you very much. Eric, we got backstage, and the first thing Eric said was, he said, I watch those prison shows on MSNBC all the time.
Every night from 9 till midnight.
See, this just doesn't fit your profile to me. I don't know why. I just have this vision of you doing something much more serious. But it's great to see you today. Thank you very much for coming. This is a huge week for Google.
Yeah.
I mean, couple of big announcements. One over the weekend that has to do with Clear Channel, an agreement with all the Clear Channel radio stations that has to do with advertising. Tell us how this is going to work.
The Clear Channel deal is the defining deal for our radio business, and we're beyond excited about this deal. I think everybody in the room knows that Clear Channel is by far the largest collection of radio stations nationwide, and working with John Hogan, we were able to come up with a deal structure where we get a fair amount of inventory, literally ad spots, both in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and in every major market. The big cities, the smaller markets, of course, they're everywhere. And what we can do is we can use our ad technology to bring in more advertisers. So it should result in significant more revenue for Clear Channel. It should result in a lot of advertiser satisfaction, because advertisers want to advertise everywhere, and it's been difficult for them to get, especially smaller ones, to get into the radio market.
Needless to say, you're kind of walking into the lion's den in some ways with broadcasters here today. There are some people out there who are a little bit concerned about the future. They're worried about what Google's doing. They're worried about what other companies are doing and the decline, what some see as the decline of broadcasting. Some of the folks that I talked to today, actually yesterday before the announcement, they wanted to know who needs Google in this advertising business, the traditional radio and television advertising, if it's going to end up lowering the price of ads. Who needs Google if it means that why should TV and radio stations cooperate with Google on this?
Well, Google is a new phenomena. It doesn't replace radio or television. Google is not going to start talking to you on your radio anytime soon. Thank goodness, by the way. And it seems to me that Google has an advertising business that can add to the success of radio and television worldwide. And of course, you all are the experts, I am not. In looking at it, it looks like the radio business and the television advertising business have been relatively flat in revenue growth. And we all care a lot about revenue growth. And one of the ways in which you can affect that is by bringing in more advertisers, literally more people who want to participate. All of us are significant consumers of television and radio. The most recent study I saw said that people spend a couple hours a day on the radio, 4 or so hours on television, and a minority of their time on a relative basis on the internet. So these are massive businesses and very, very important. So if our technology can bring more advertisers to the radio, I think it's a good thing. We're doing something similar with television in that we are trying, and again, these are trials. We've announced a couple, the most recent with EchoStar, where we can tell people, we can insert video ads, and we can tell them things that they wouldn't otherwise know. Things like, are they really watching the commercials or not? Because we can measure them better. And one of the arguments for advertisers is advertisers care about efficiency, targetability, measurability. And the tools that Google is developing are simply better tools than the previous generation. It's technology, you know, it gets better and better and better. And one of the businesses that Google is in the advertising tools business. A radio advertiser, talking about Clear Channel for a sec, may come through Google, and they may already be an online advertiser, and they may never have thought about advertising on the radio. So with literally just one click of a button, they can literally record, hopefully a reasonably high quality radio ad, and ship it into the system. And in the Clear Channel partnership, we've actually worked to connect our computers to their computers. So as an inventory slot comes open, our computers can fill it almost immediately and dynamically. This has never been done before. This is why this is such a defining deal for us.
The concern, I guess, among some is that maybe there are only so many ad dollars out there, and that Google and the internet may end up taking the ad dollars away from broadcast and bringing it to the internet.
I don't agree with that. I read that. It doesn't make sense to me. And the reason is that advertisers will put money where they get the best conversion. They will shift money from the lower performing advertising sources to better performing. But advertising as an industry is growing. So the trick in whatever business you're in, and you're dependent upon advertising, is to use the best targeting, the most efficient, the best technology. The money is there. We all benefit from better ads. It makes no sense to have an ad that's not targeted to you. It's more important to have an ad that's more relevant to you. The technology that Google and others, Google's not the only company doing this, will produce more targeted, more relevant, more measurable ads. And we think that that will grow revenue. We actually disagree with the whole premise of that question.
So Clear Channel is not turning over all of its ad inventory to you, just a portion of that.
No, in fact, the deal structure starts with on the order of 5% or so. And then as we outperform the more traditional choices, that percentage might increase. Or it may not if we don't outperform. So we have an incentive to do better and better. The other thing that we were very concerned about, both John and I, was to make sure that it did not displace or otherwise affect the sales relationships that they and others have already had in place. So by virtue of our deal structure, we're primarily focused on bringing new advertisers to radio.
Let's talk about DoubleClick for a moment. The other huge announcement this past week, $3.1 billion.
In cash.
That's a lot of Google cash. Tell us what this means for Google advertising online.
Well, again, radio advertising and Clear Channel is one component of our business. Historically, Google's business, which has been, of course, very successful, has been in targeted text ads. There's another business that has done very, very well in so-called display ads. And DoubleClick has been the leader in display ads for many, many years. We have spent a fair amount of time getting to know them. We worked with them pretty closely. And when the owners decided that it was time to think about selling them or taking them public, we literally jumped at the chance to talk to DoubleClick about becoming part of Google. What DoubleClick does is it takes the more media-intensive static ads, so-called display ads, and places them on many, many properties. And they have by far the best tools for advertisers and publishers. By this acquisition, Google will be able to take those tools and combine them with some of the other tools that we've built, and also improve their technology, because of course we have a lot of interesting technology in the ad space. The combination should provide a whole bunch of benefits: more measurability for advertisers and publishers of ads. It should make our systems faster. The users should see faster ad loading, regardless of whether it's on a Google page or an affiliate page, and a bunch of other technical benefits. The primary benefit from the acquisition of DoubleClick is that the advertisers who place their ads will have a more integrated, more measurable, higher performing, more efficient platform to make those decisions. And that's what they care about. And by the way, the amounts of money that they're shipping into this diaspora of advertising, of which Google is a small part, very, very large amounts of money. So small increases in targetability, measurability, and accuracy, huge benefit to the advertiser.
There have been some critics since the announcement, chiefly Microsoft.
Yes.
And one of the things that Microsoft says about this deal, they've raised antitrust questions.
Microsoft?
Microsoft has raised questions about privacy.
Microsoft?
Microsoft. What do you say to that?
I'll have to think about it.
They say you're too big.
Microsoft?
You have too much of the market share.
We didn't rehearse this. Did they actually say all of this?
Yes.
You're kidding me.
You haven't read the newspaper lately, have you?
Well, maybe I didn't believe it. It was Microsoft.
I'm just delivering the news, Eric.
The specific complaints that Microsoft has made are clearly false. The ad business, those of you who have studied the advertising business, it's a very large business. somewhere between 700 billion to $1 trillion globally, about half that in the United States. Google's last year's revenue was a little more than 10 billion, so 1 to 2%. So arguments about size of market, monopoly, and so forth, antitrust, I mean, maybe they're well practiced from their previous experience in making these arguments, but it just doesn't make sense. A more likely scenario is that they were unhappy because they're competitors of ours.
But it doesn't come as a surprise to you to hear the comment, the front cover of Business Week, who's afraid of Google, that Google's business has become so big and so powerful and so strong that you can buy for $1.6 billion YouTube, that you can buy DoubleClick for $3.3 billion, that you have more information about more people and what they do and what they buy and what they think than anybody else, and you have control of that, and that makes you a very, very powerful corporation. How do you respond to those who are concerned about that kind of power being in one's hand?
I think there's a set of very legitimate concerns and then a set of concerns that I don't agree with. Let me give you an example of a very legitimate concern. We make changes to our ranking algorithms all the time, and we do it in order to improve the quality of our answers. And we do it based on a set of mathematics and science and so forth. We roll out one of these changes, and it could significantly affect somebody's business. And I don't think we really understood the kind of impact we could have until the last year or so, when people would report to us that some ranking change changed the entire pattern of how they were treated. All of a sudden they weren't the top ranking or so forth. And they felt like they were, and since we weren't aware of it, it was clearly unintentional, they were really devastated by our action, and they complained and so forth. Because of the way our algorithms work, Google is really about algorithms, we cannot necessarily predict some of the unintended consequences. And I think that's a very legitimate concern. We spend a lot of time internally in the company saying to people, be very careful about what you do because millions of people depend on this. As an aside, and not to take away from your general subject, we discovered that people use Google for health information, which I find very scary. And in fact, many people use Google to rely on for health information rather than their doctor because there's so much health information in there. Well, what if we get it wrong? Somebody could actually die. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So the moral burden, the ethical burden, and the business burden of accuracy and not doing things unintentionally is very, very significant. We've tried to address this issue of our rising profile, if you will, by building partnerships. You fundamentally will be more successful if you share in the wealth, if you share in building a larger ecosystem. And for the last year, we have constructed partnerships with Dell, Fox, MySpace, for example, eBay, Intuit, a long list. And those are going very, very well for us because now they're helping. And part of the way we've built those partnerships is we share in the revenue. And in fact, one of the stories that's not told about Google is how much of the revenue that goes through Google, in fact, does not go to Google, it goes to other partners. And we think that's a partial answer. I understand the sort of the fear, or the Business Week article uses the term Googlezilla. We run the company in a way that's different from normal companies, because we're completely end user focused. And our argument is that as long as end users are finding our solutions better, then we should be successful and we're going to be able to build a successful worldwide business. The moment we lose the trust of the end user, the moment we do something that will annoy them, violate their privacy, that kind of thing, then we could lose them. And when we lose them, it's very easy for them to switch. So part of the way we answer the fear question is to say that Google is successful because end users choose Google, and end users are 1 nanosecond away from choosing our competitor. And we don't keep them, we don't lock them in. And that's, I think, so far been the success that we've had.
Let's talk about content for a moment. Sure. And YouTube has been sued by Viacom for $1 billion.
Nice round number.
Nice round number. With regard to questions about copyright. And I've heard you talk a lot about copyright over the last 6 months. Content is something that's very important to a lot of these people here. First of all, does YouTube or Google, do they make money off the content of others? Is that the way they make money?
there's a lot of confusion about this. The Viacom case is easy to understand in the context of how Viacom was built. In Viacom, you're either doing a business deal with them or being sued by them. We started the former, and then we ended up with the latter. And it's literally just a business transaction, and everyone's very friendly about it. Very different business than I'm used to. The easiest way to understand Google's role with content, I think, is to understand that we are critically dependent upon the production of copyrighted content. Literally, people come to Google to get to somewhere where there's something of value. And so it's very important that we not violate copyright. However,
so this is the idea, I don't mean to interrupt, but just for a moment, that you're sending someone, if they view a clip of something from Viacom, for Comedy Central, that then they're going to click through to a Viacom site, and therefore Viacom's going to get the benefit of
this is the idea. Now, what is happening, and this is a big issue for all of us, is that end users are using DVRs, tape recorders, what have you, and they're uploading illegally, by the way. They're violating people's copyrights to put the copyrighted information into services like YouTube. YouTube is one of many. And under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, it's a shared burden in that situation. We are not required, as the owner of the system that runs it, to police everything, but if we receive a request, we must act very quickly to take it down. So indeed, Viacom and others have given us takedown notices. The most entertaining one was last week, where we got a very nice letter from the Australian Broadcasting, think of it as the ABC, which is the national broadcaster of Australia, asking to take down a whole bunch of content that wasn't supposed to be on the site, which we immediately took down. It was discovered that the letter itself was a forgery from a 16-year-old who has since been apologized, and the content has been pushed back up. So, you just can't win. And so, under the current balance of the law, if we're not aware typically of copyrighted content.
This is fair use, right?
Think of it as fair use. But it's covered on this thing called the DMCA. And the DMCA was created to protect the people who own the pipes, the telecom operators and so forth. And it was a balance of interests, as is typical in political outcomes. So what happens is that as long as everybody's paying attention, a bad copy comes up, we immediately take it down. It works. This is obviously not going to be the manual process is going to take forever. Everybody has to be watching, it wastes a lot of time. So we are in the process of developing tools which are called CYC, Claim Your Content, where if people essentially tell us this is a licensed copy, our computers will automatically detect that an illegal copy has been uploaded and then automatically delete it.
They can't do that now.
The computers, we're very close to turning this on. We are testing it with 2 or 3 of our partners.
So if somebody uploads a program that's copyrighted, it would automatically be taken down?
In some cases today, and within a few months, it'll be for everything.
So the question will be
at that point. At that point, it becomes a moot issue.
Were you surprised by the deal that NBC and News Corp struck to try to come up with kind of a competitor to YouTube?
No, not at all. It's been labeled as a competitor, but in fact, it's a different kind of an animal. It's an exclusive licensing group with a site that's going to come out, they say, this summer, and it's primarily targeted at long-form content. One of the things, and I hope folks in the audience have had a chance to look at YouTube and spend some time on it, is that YouTube is not television. YouTube is a different phenomena. It's worth actually exploring what that phenomena looks like. For example, today's news is that Al Jazeera is going to take all of its clips and put them on YouTube, including their star, whose name is Yusuf Islam, also known as Cat Stevens. I mean, we're talking weird stuff here. And they're typically 2 to 3 to 4 minutes long, and they're mailed to other people, and they're cross-linked. So again, it's very different from the 30-minute or the 60-minute segment, the things that you pioneered as a broadcaster that I have watched all my life. Very different phenomena. It's very social. It's very community. Think of it as a platform which is also a community. What are my friends talking about? What's neat? What's interesting? That kind of thing.
But if you take the best from The Daily Show and the 4 most interesting clips from last night's show, aren't you really taking that and using it to make money without
Well, first place.
Those are gone now.
No, first place, in Viacom's case, they asked us to take those down, and we took them down.
Right.
And indeed, Viacom.
But why not do it to begin with?
Well, again, they own the copyright, it's their decision. And indeed, Viacom is now trying to advertise on ComedyCentral.com and other websites that they own. And that's a perfectly legitimate business strategy. They own the content, it's their choice. We failed in convincing them that they could make money doing it on YouTube as well. We are busy building an online video advertising solution, which is similar to the kind of stuff that we talked about with radio and Clear Channel, where it will be possible to monetize the videos that are on YouTube. And there'll be pre-roll, post-roll, and other kinds of things. The evidence that we've gotten, by the way, is that this medium is really a medium about attention. And that the way it will really work goes something like this. Somebody's a huge fan of yours, and they'll see a 1 or 2 minute clip of you, and then as part of the advertising, we'll take them to a much deeper site, which you can then monetize them on. So one of the things that I was going to mention has to do with the derivation of the word fan. A fan is based on fanatic. And the great thing about technologies like YouTube and some of the other sites as well, is the fans find you. And they are beside themselves. We did a big deal with the NBA, for example, where we're putting clips on, and when the person comes and sees the clips, they immediately then go to the NBA website. And on the NBA website, the NBA can sell them sports paraphernalia, other things. But the people who are coming to that website are their top viewers. They're the people who care the most about the NBA. They're not casual. So all of a sudden, and in your broadcast businesses, you typically have, and I know this is true in radio and television, you have some people who live and die by what you're doing, and you have other people who are casual viewers. Well, we separate the two in a way that you can't do with traditional technologies. You can monetize those high impact, high passion people, bring them to trips, popularize them, deputize them, whatever it takes.
But then what happens to the old traditional business of broadcasting in the meantime? Where is it headed? I mean, you of all people probably know more about what technology is coming down the road that's going to affect broadcasters and broadcasting. What's your view? How do you see the future?
Well, if we think about, let's use television and radio. Television and radio are very mature forms of essentially the way you perceive them. But all of them are getting technology upgrades, digital terrestrial radio of one kind or another, HD television, which all of us in the room are part of. So those models will just get better and better and better. They're not being eclipsed, if you will, by the YouTubes of the world. The real opportunity is to link these things together. If you think about the new model of content, it's going to be something like this. Using basketball, any sport would work, but I get a short segment of basketball highlight on my mobile phone. And I look at this and I get incredibly excited. Either I hate them or I love them or whatever, and I send them to my 5 friends, right, with some trash talk or something like that, and then they send it. It's very viral. That started from a traditional mechanism, and then it moved into the mobile world and then got the community going. It is the seamlessness of that integration. The stuff was authored for radio, authored for television, done in a traditional way, but then taken into this new model. That's the path. And that will work particularly well if you can target the fanatics, which our technology allows us to do.
I just want to talk about newspapers for a second, because Sam Zell's been quoted as saying that it's time for Google to stop, I believe he used the word stealing newspaper stories from newspaper stories from newspapers and putting them on Google. And Google is not, you don't create the content, you just organize it and lay it out there for people to see. But give me your reaction to that. I mean, I asked Marissa Mayer this last year when we had the head of AP on stage as well. It's another one of the sort of awkward situations when it comes to content.
I object to the word stealing because we've signed a full license agreement with the Associated Press and then the European equivalent, which is called AFP. So that's completely not correct. We're absolutely licensed. And the newspapers, I was very worried with the newspapers when we brought out Google News. Those of you who've not used Google News, it's essentially a headline service. We have a set of computers that read about 4,500 newspapers globally, and the computers process it and then rank them based on the importance of the story. So today, of course, there's a tragedy in Blacksburg, Virginia. And all of a sudden, that whole tragedy becomes the biggest story on Google News because our computers read what all the other newspapers are writing, and then it knows enough to know that this is a really hot story. And I was very worried that the news editors and so forth would be worried about this. And we found out subsequently that the news editors use us first when they get up in the morning to see what the baseline is, to see that they can write their own special interpretation. So we see it as a partnership. We provide the basic carriage, the basic analysis that computers can provide, but we don't provide any insight. We make no claims to truthfulness or anything like that. That's up to the reporters and the newspapers and the journalists who do such a great job.
But does the technology reduce the number of credible editorial voices in America?
There's a very serious issue that the funding for newspapers, which has been historically from advertising and the yellow and essentially classifieds, same problem is also true in Yellow Pages, are being affected by the adoption rate of the internet. I did not appreciate how significant, especially local newspapers, were dependent upon classifieds. And frankly, most people that I know don't use the classifieds anymore. They use services like Google, and they just look it up online. We are doing a very successful partnership now we have 100 advertisers, 70 newspapers, where we're doing essentially the same deal as we've done with radio, where we basically take all the ads and ship them to the newspapers. And so far, the feedback is very, very positive. We're doing that precisely because we want to provide the funding to keep these people who produce content going. It is affecting those newspapers, and it's not a good thing.
I want to mention in just a few minutes, we have a couple of microphones set up here, and Eric has graciously agreed to take your questions, and we want to give you some time to ask the questions that you want. So think about it. We'll ask you to give us your name and where you're from and ask a question in just a moment. You have said several times that I've heard, don't bet against the internet. Because if you bet against the internet and you're part of a business strategy that doesn't work, you're going to lose. Do you think that some people or some in broadcasting have been betting against the internet?
I think the people who use litigation to prevent change are betting against the internet. There are people in this room who built businesses as entrepreneurs, and you will see before you an entrepreneurial opportunity of a new kind. It's a whole new generation. Your child story, right, about being online. Jack's story is a good example. They're spending their time in this new medium. That is as big a possible land grab as what the founders of modern television in the 50s, radio in the 30s and 40s saw. It's just a different generation. And the reason I keep saying don't bet against the internet is it's going to happen. People are going to use the internet to change their lives. It's too convenient, it's too powerful, it's too exciting, it's too sexy, it's too easy. People are going to, and there are many examples of this, but do a little bit of math. Moore's law means that you get a doubling every 18 months, which is a factor of 10 every 5 years. So in 5 years, you'll have a 10 times faster device on a mobile phone. Estimates are that we can have all of the world's current knowledge in the equivalent of an iPod-like device by roughly 2012 or 2013. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is the amount of information is growing much quicker. But the technological revolution in between wireless, targeting advertising, mobility is here to stay. When I grew up, of course, radio was over the wire, but now a correct definition of what radio is really audio over the air and also over the internet. Let's make money in both cases.
But when you say the end user is going to make up his or her mind about what they want, and that's just not the model. That's just not the old model of broadcasting. I mean,
but the new model will have to address user empowerment. It is a fundamental shift, and I think people who try to slow it down end
by
up
sticking their head in the sand.
Well, they end up preserving things for a while, but eventually it's a cliff. It's much better to place some bets, learn from them. And the other thing I would tell you is that if you look at the history of radio and the history of television advertising, again, Google's in the advertising business, the model that we grew up with, that I grew up as a child, was not the first model that they tried. Right, the 30-second ad and the 60-second ad and the 22 minutes per 30 minutes and so forth and so on. That was all developed over a period of 15 or 20 years. So this new model will take some experimentation. We're going to have to find out whether pre-roll is better than post-roll. How are we going to monetize all these podcasts that are similar to radio but not quite the same? How are we going to search them? Who is going to be the Larry King equivalent in the internet? Because we know that there will be at least one, or maybe there will be 1,000. And if you're a fan of Larry King, that's great, and if you're not, that's a problem. The important point is that this medium is going to happen. And it will take a new generation of entrepreneurs, and I think many of them are in the room.
Let's let some of them walk up to the mic if you've got a question and ask it. We've got somebody in the center here. Tell us your name.
Hello, my name's Steve Herring. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I have a two-part question for you, specifically in regards to content filtering or removal of copyrighted material. The first part of that is that, just in the case of the letter that you were describing from the person in Australia who ended up being fake, you have content that's put up and an onus of responsibility on individuals or the consumers to prove that they're the valid owner of specific content. How do you provide validation of the identities of the people asking for the ownership of the content to be removed? And then further in that, it seems to me that the obvious thing that happens over the internet over time is that in some way, some entity, whether it be Google or someone else, will have to provide for some form of authentication or verification of identities of individuals globally. And how do you see that as responsibility as a corporation involved in this?
Your question is a very deep one, because the question of how do you trust what end users are telling you is a fundamentally very hard question. So for example, you validate an end user and then somebody else comes along and they claim they're the first one. How do you know who they are? And this problem has to be solved globally and at scale. And it has to be solved in many different ways. In the case of things like Claim Your Content, the number of producers of content that are legitimate is a relatively finite number. And for the kinds of claims that we deal with at scale, the industry is consolidated enough that we can know who they are. There are indices, there are guidebooks, there's contact points, there are service addresses and so forth. So it looks like the process, once automated, will work pretty well. And we use a combination of audio and video digital fingerprinting that once is programmed into the computer, it's relatively easy for us to detect and spit out inappropriate contents. We also have a challenge mechanism in Google and in YouTube, so that if somebody claims they own the content and somebody else makes a similar claim, in other words, you have two competing claims, then we have a person do an investigation. It has turned out that this has not been a big time sink. The most important thing from our perspective is getting the process of identifying content that is uploaded by end users around the world, some hot property of one kind or another, where they're uploading incorrectly or illegally, to do that in an automated way. The issue of owner verification and so forth has turned out not to be a big time sink. Longer term it may be, but right now we just need to get the content that's illegal off the site.
Let's try over here.
Hi, Roseanne Weissman with the Alliance to Save Energy in Washington, D.C., and we are a partner of the NAB on the public service end. The growth of the internet that you're talking about, and also companies like Google, means the growth of a huge other industry, and that's the whole data centers, which use a tremendous amount of energy. A lot of people in this audience are covering, big news stories like energy security, global climate change, pollution, et cetera. What are you as a company doing to improve your own energy efficiency?
I believe we have the largest solar rooftop in any business in America, which we're about to turn on. And that unfortunately only covers some of the power needs that we generate as a company. It's mostly our office buildings. As you correctly pointed out, this new generation of computers use large and very expensive to run data centers. It's one of the things we spend much of our capital budget on. And we are siting those using green power. So for example, the larger sites have typically got a green power solution. We've looked at the math, and there's not going to be enough green power even under all of these assumptions. And so we're now considering ways of doing investments and other kinds of partnerships in various forms of solar and other technology to help power the data centers. The most bizarre thing about power and power utilization is that it's good business to save power. It's good business to be energy efficient. So we spend many millions of dollars to make our computers more efficient, if you will, to use essentially fewer disk arm movements, literally less power, less heat, and so forth and so on. We use very special kind of water cooling and so forth because it saves us money. It's also good. It's also a good moral thing. But in particular, I think the message for this audience is that saving power and being power efficient is good for business as well.
Yes.
My name is Clarence Harris. I'm with Diversity International Television Network in Athens, Georgia. It seems like, I guess, Google is on the cutting edge of advancing the whole industry in various forms of broadcasting. The question is, to enlarge this ecosystem, especially in the area of education, what is the method or the process whereby which Google go through the process of acquiring a new acquisition of corporations and companies to become partnerships?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what specific, are you talking about how we make acquisitions or what are our criteria?
Well, your criteria and the methodology by which acquisitions are made.
We've recently had a couple of acquisitions, as John mentioned, YouTube and DoubleClick. Historically, those are rare. Historically, the acquisitions that we do are very small teams of engineers because they've invented a specific, highly technical component that we need as part of our overall system. And the acquisition is essentially done for the purposes of getting those people on board. And it's essentially in lieu of hiring them and inventing it ourselves. We buy the company, get the intellectual property as part of the purchase, and we get the employees who are happy to work at Google. So in almost all cases, the criteria that we've used has been technology fit. And indeed, people will send me a note saying, we'd like to be bought. And I always say, find an engineer, right? Get somebody inside the company who's really excited about what you have invented or so forth. This model has worked very well. Folks here in the room may be familiar with Google Earth, which is just an amazing product. And a new way of looking at the world, from satellites came through an acquisition. The spreadsheet product came through an acquisition. The calendar product came out through acquisition. All of our advertising analytical products came through an acquisition. They all came through that path. Go ahead.
Have you thought about the possibility of increasing the scope or the magnitude of the viewership and their also knowledge of the use of the technology in the market through education?
We don't think of it that way. What we think about is what can we do to get more people using Google every day? Because again, it's all focused on the end user. So if we can come up with a product or a service that will solve some interesting problem, it will make your life easier, we'll build it or buy it or what have you. A big focus for the company has been in developing countries, where it turns out people will significantly benefit from the adoption of the internet. Much of that adoption will occur by using mobile phones, because mobile phones will be the primary way in which people who are very, very poor in developing countries will get access to the internet, and we think that's a good thing.
Yes.
Robert Amar, Trinidad and Tobago. I know you said that you are involved in advertising, but I'm happy that you touched on Google Earth, which is the area that I want to talk about. Google Earth is such a powerful thing, and based on the whole dynamics of the world and the difficulties that is taking place, do you see yourself interacting, I would say, with State Department in the United States of America, trying to use that as a phenomena of solving this insurgencies all over the world that is taking place? Can you see that as being something that's going to happen?
It's important that Google not become involved in politics of any kind. We did make a decision that the terrible, terrible things going on in the Sudan, we put in a Google Earth layer where you could actually, because most people think Darfur is something they hear about on the news, but if we can visualize it, if we can show you where it is, if we can show you pictures of the terrible suffering that's going on there, the world might help those people who are so unfortunate as to have been born and be stuck in such a terrible place. So that's a case where we made such a decision. One of the more interesting things that happens at Google is that all of the various disputes that exist in the world end up at Google. So for example, India and Pakistan disagree on a border. Well, how do you draw the border in Google Earth? Various people disagree over the names of things. Well, which name do you show first? And one side loses and one side wins. And sometimes you can ask the United Nations for help because they've been dealing with people arguing over these things for years, but sometimes they don't even agree. The US government has been very, very supportive of our use of commercial satellites for this. And I think that the government sees this as another way for the American values and American openness to come worldwide, which I think is a good thing.
Google has an impact on politics, though, or politics has an impact on Google. China, for instance, is a case in point where Google allowed itself to be censored, yes?
Yeah, China was the most difficult decision that we made because the Chinese law essentially requires self-censorship. So what we did when we entered China was we actually, if we omit something, which is quite rare, by the way, but when we omit something, we say this content was censored. And of course, the average Chinese end user then immediately uses the tools that get them around the censorship to find out what they're missing, because these people are very smart. So much for the censorship proposal. But nevertheless, we have to operate by the law. There are a lot of examples where Google has ended up affecting politics. There's something called You Choose 2008 on YouTube, sort of an alliteration of naming. And You Choose 2008 is an opportunity where we are showcasing, again, without political bias, the key candidates for Democratic and Republican nomination for president. And they're given an opportunity to tell their story, develop a fan base, and so forth and so on, and we're moving that around. It's pretty neat. There have been some cases where YouTube has been used to the detriment of politicians. I can mention a number of them. The senator from Virginia uttered an inappropriate slang word that was caught on YouTube and lost the election. A couple of the Democratic challengers for president have been caught in, shall we say, unflattering moments that have been widely circulated on YouTube. So I think people are very aware of this, and it's going to change politics.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Ben Konak with Mentat Media. And as you talked about that the growing internet and the population of some of the new tools, in that what I'm worried about is some of the net neutrality problems with between the ISPs, AT&T, and some of the groups that are controlling the pipes, in that I'll develop a great application, or some of the people out here will develop this great application, but possibly it'd be slowed down. I'm just looking for some assurances of how to...
Well, we Google have taken a strong position, along with the other key companies in the industry, eBay, Yahoo, Microsoft, et cetera, that it was important that the principle of the internet, which is the end-to-end principle, where basically people are not unfairly discriminated against, is maintained by all the internet providers. The issue has largely been fought through in the Senate and the House, and at the moment it's sort of at a stalemate. I don't think we're going to see much activity there because of the various mergers and other activities within the telecommunications industry for a couple of years. So I think that in the short term, the message is good that we're going to have that. It would be a mistake, if, in our view, if the internet were cut into pieces, that you had to pay for a special part of the internet and it didn't have the sort of global reach that it has today. The perverse thing about this is that if there's any company that could afford to pay for such service, it would be Google. And in fact, the loss of net neutrality would probably benefit Google in some sense, in a crass business sense, but we don't think it's good to the world, and we know it would be bad for entrepreneurs and innovators who are going to build the next Google. Yes.
My name's Craig Strong. I'm from Portland, Oregon. My business has used the Google keyword advertising to great effect, and what's great is that I'm able to track exactly how effective it is. Recently, we've had to invest in ways of filtering out some of the fraudulent sites, and I'm wondering, is Google taking steps to make this continue to be a very effective and excellent advertising venue?
Thank you for that. That's exactly what we're doing. And it turns out that as Google's advertising network has become more successful, people are trying to game the system. They try to use fraudulent pages, they try to redirect clicks, and those sorts of things. We have a team of literally physicists whose jobs are to look at how the advertising flows, where the clicks are, and if we see any anomalies, we detect them by computer, or in the worst case, deal with them by hand. And the general term for what you're describing is called click fraud. It seems to be under control, it seems to be manageable, but I don't think it'll ever go away. I think it'll always be an issue for an advertising company online.
Manipulation of the internet by businesses, by politicians, how big a problem is that?
Well, it should get bigger, if you think about it, because the internet, if you follow my reasoning, will become more and more central to everybody's lives, and so it'll be more important to get the right outcome. So I love it when somebody says, well, I got 10,000 hits. Well, one computer can generate 10,000 hits just like that. So do you know, is it 10,000 separate people, or is it just one computer that somebody programmed to just bump you? There are situations where people will, for example, create a whole, what is called a link farm, and they'll try to replicate the Google PageRank solution. The good news is we can detect this these days, and they'll have everybody point to one page to get its rank up. And we can now detect that, but it's an example of the kind of manipulation that goes on. Yes?
My name is Ujjwal Nirgudkar. I come from India, from an entertainment industry. Now, in India, we have a lot of information available in languages other than English. Do you have any plan to have all those information available on the Google websites from languages other than English?
We support about 110 languages and 5 languages that don't exist, which you can, one is called Bork Bork Bork, to give you an idea. It's quite a nice language, but it doesn't really exist. And we have a set of volunteer translators who are adding them. We support a number of the native Indian languages, but not all 20 or 25, as you said, so we're working on that. And eventually we think we'll get virtually all of the languages that have any form of writing into Google. Many of these languages have almost no websites, so there's also an issue. A lot of linguists are concerned that these specialized languages are going to die out because they don't have web pages, they're not in written form. And so we're working on that.
So there will be future expansion in this immediately?
Excuse me?
There is going to be an expansion immediately?
Yeah, and we're working on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tamar Pixley. I'm from Santa Barbara, California, and I'm an independent content producer. I recently attended a conference for independent producers in which they told us we should not upload our content to YouTube because we would lose ownership. So my question for you is, how do we take advantage of sites like YouTube and maintain ownership of our content?
Well, you were misled. If you upload something to YouTube, you will retain your copyright. It is possible that somebody might make an illegal copy of it, but at some point you have to get it online. So, but I would encourage you to take your content and as you see fit, put it into YouTube and YouTube's competitors, and try to understand how this phenomena actually plays out. And I think you'll find that if you take your content and you link it to blogs and specialty sites and so forth, you can develop quite a strong audience. One of the things that we've committed is that we will, over time, develop ways in which we can compensate you as the creative person for participating in creating content for YouTube.
We've just got a few more minutes, so if you can keep your questions short, we can get as many in as we can. Yes.
Hello, thank you for being with us today. My name's Wendy Millette, and I work with the My Hero Project, and we celebrate heroes and heroism and celebrating the best of humanity. And I see that you represent a form of a hero to many, and I think our audience of millions of students and teachers around the globe would like to know who one of your heroes might be.
Well, I have many. Robert Oppenheimer, who one of the most interesting scientists in his history, is a very interesting character. There are many. There are many. Vince Cerf. I used to say that, then we hired him, so then it sounded like I was being favoritism, but as the inventor of the internet.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much.
I'm Zamira Jones with Radio 1. We're the largest African-American managed radio company in the country. We are in 22 markets, and we've been watching the success of Google. Congratulate you for it. One question, we've been watching the events of Clear Channel's deal with great interest. Sometimes your company has been considered a major disruptor to radio and television, especially now when radio is in that maturity stage of the life cycle. Introduction, growth, maturity, decline stage. Some say radio's in a decline stage. And with a disruptor potentially like Google, it could really have an adverse impact on that form of the industry. My question is, if you were a radio person and you weren't running Google, and a deal like this one was just done, how are you going to make sure that radio doesn't become a victim of the category killer that some people accuse Google of being?
In order to, and by the way, you have a great radio voice. In order to innovate, and an entrepreneur, you're going to have to come up with something with technology, some kind of engineering approach to something. So as a radio entrepreneur, I think in this situation, what I would do is either build an engineering team or find an engineering partner who could extend my reach, who could somehow get my content, get my brand and so forth into some new mechanisms. And even if I didn't work with Google, of course I would obviously, I have a bias here, I would encourage myself to work with Google. But even if I chose not to work with Google for whatever reason, I would find a way to use a technology hook. I would find myself, and frankly, I would start at universities. There's a whole, one of the great things about Google is it's full of young people coming right out of the universities for whom this is not a befuddling world. It's an obvious world, and they're dying to do it. And they want to connect their iPod to their podcast, to their radio station, to their television station, to their PS3, and they want to do it in parallel all the time. That's a market, and it's a big market, and they're growing up.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, my name is Mike Munoz from Dallas, Texas, and in doing research over the past 9 months on IPTV, I noticed in several of my early Google searches that Google was looking for IPTV talent. What, if anything, can you discuss about Google's plans in the IPTV space?
So far, we've done a couple of things. We've done a trial in a cable company in Concord for targeted ads, where we essentially take traditional 30-second ads using our ad system and target them and put them into the cable head ends. So far, that trial is underway. It looks good so far. The second thing, of course, is the EchoStar deal, which has been public, where we're again using ads and then advertising into that. I don't think Google itself will get into the IPTV business. I think there are many good companies working in that space. It's more likely that we'll be an advertising supplier to them. And that's what we want, because they're going to need to have some money to fund all of that, and we think we're good at that.
A couple more questions, yes.
Hi, Steve Abrams from BDC Venture Capital in Montreal. If you were a VC, what would you be investing in, and what kind of technologies are you looking for?
Mobile. If you think about it, the mobile device is the DVD of this generation. The DVD was the killer app for the last 20 years in terms of monetization, content, and so forth. The mobile phone will be the next such platform. It's highly targeted. It's highly personal. It's going to, over the next 5 to 10 years, get tremendous processing power. The mobile operators are busy putting in very high-speed bandwidth networks in the new generation, so-called 3G and eventually 4G, very, very powerful. So figuring out how to get your platform, your content, your viewer onto the mobile device, I think is the next big challenge.
Yes. Last question.
You just answered the question I was going to ask.
Oh.
That was what we couldn't imagine, that you wouldn't have terrific forward-looking radar. So in terms of what are the hot areas in the future, I think you've just touched upon it. What about IPv6, commoditized trading systems, some of these other areas? Are you looking into these as well?
Those are really infrastructure plays. IPv6, which is the next generation of TCP/IP, is rolling out, especially in countries like India and China. All of those are good. From Google's perspective, all adoption of broadband is positive, whether it's wireless broadband, whether it's wired broadband, cable or DSL, all of these new devices. And the reason is that people will need some content. And we find that people will use Google on those devices and on those new networks. Our revenue accelerates, people use it more, they become addicted, the world is a good place.
Well, you know, after listening to Eric Schmidt here, that you've had the opportunity to listen to one of the most fascinating people on the planet at this time in our lives. So please tell him how much you appreciate him coming today and answering your questions.
Thank you. And thank you, John.
It's great to be with you.
Eric, thank you for this extraordinary opportunity to get inside Google, hear your vision of the future, which the vision I heard was try to convince yourself that Google is the answer to all questions. John, thanks to you too for what you do best, which is asking the questions we learn from. The live images you saw today on the IMAG screens were produced in state-of-the-art high-definition television. The HD production truck has been provided by Sweetwater Digital Productions, Van Nuys, California. The beautiful digital projection by American High Definition. Before we leave, 3 housekeeping items. First, let me invite you to the GM Multi-Platform Beer and Pizza Idea Exchange over in room N238 at the Convention Center, taking place right after this event. Be sure to stop by the B-sponsored HD radio reception going on now in the Radio Pro Audio Hall Also, tomorrow morning, don't miss the FCC breakfast beginning at 7:30 right here in the Barron Room. Thanks to all of you, and enjoy your evening.